So Bill Cosby back in the news. His appeal of his 2018 conviction has reached the Pennsylvania Supreme Court now. And during a hearing this morning, the panel of judges questioned prosecutors on several issues, including why they presented 5 women as prior bad acts if they felt they had a strong case with accuser Andrea Constant. Cosby was found guilty of sexually assaulting Constant in his Elkins Park home. He says the encounter was consensual, but he's now serving 3 to 10 years in state prison. The judges now have 150 days to make a decision, which could include granting Cosby a new trial. Joining us now is retired Judge Michael Donio. Judge, thanks for being here. You were on the air with us all through that trial, right? And you said then that we would be talking about the number of witnesses during Cosby's appeal. Here we are. Remind us why this is so important and was so important during the case.
Well, as we talked about, Jim, 3 years ago, this was the central issue in this case, allowing these other people to testify. If you recall, in the first case that ended in a mistrial, the judge allowed just one person to testify about what we call 404B evidence or prior uncharged acts. In the second trial, the state sent the judge like 16, I think, different affidavits of people that they wanted to testify. The judge reviewed that and determined that 5 people would testify about other acts, crimes, or wrongs that were similar in nature as it was in this case, and asked the prosecutor to pick the 5. And they put 5 people in. The justices today, from what I saw, were a little bit skeptical of that, and they made some comments that it was highly prejudicial to Mr. Cosby. And that's the test, whether or not the probative value is outweighed by the prejudice to the defendant. So the way things happened today in the courtroom was quite different from what we've seen in this case in the past.
So we have to wait for the judges to rule, of course, but once they do, is the outcome a larger deal for the Cosby appeal specifically, or is there a precedent that could be set here that could impact other cases moving forward, do you think?
I think that's highly probable. And I'll just give you a quick example that in New Jersey, we do that completely different. Before anybody's allowed to testify about prior acts and crimes and things of that nature that are similar, we actually have testimony in court where the judge could weigh the credibility. That person could be cross-examined by the defense. In Pennsylvania, that was done by just submitting certifications or affidavits to the court. I think that the Pennsylvania Supreme Court just might send out a message in this case that we're going to change this in the future by case law and maybe say that you have to do like they do in New Jersey and many other states, that that type of testimony has to be challenged pre-trial, before the trial, in front of the trial judge, because one of the criteria to admit that testimony is the evidence has to be clear and convincing. And it's very hard to see if something's clear and convincing on an affidavit piece of paper instead of having that person in court where you could look at their credibility and they could be challenged on cross-examination. So I'm thinking that the Supreme Court just may do something that's going to change the way this type of evidence is looked at in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania.
Cosby is still behind bars, of course. Do you foresee, looking into your crystal ball, that he could get out of jail early on this appeal or for anything else? Or, as we know, he's already served several years.
Well, if this case is reversed, when the opinion comes out, I would anticipate that he would be let out of jail immediately. And then there'd be a big issue here, Jim, and that is whether or not they say the case is reversed and they remand it back for another trial, and whether or not that the prosecutor decides to go with that trial, or whether they try to make a plea deal. For instance, and a lot of times what will happen with something like this, where somebody served a couple years, they'll offer them a plea bargain to a lesser offense, and they'll give them a sentence of time served. That's going to be a very interesting dynamic because of Mr. Cosby's position throughout this case and the prosecutor's position. It's going to be very interesting to see how that would play out if the case is reversed. Now, I'm not a weatherman, but the way that I saw things in that courtroom today, the winds were pretty much in favor of Mr. Cosby based on the questions that I heard from the justices.
Very interesting. Of course, so much attention on this case. We'll have to wait to see what the justices decide. Judge Donio, thanks for being here. We appreciate it.
My pleasure.